The saddest thing about becoming rich is realizing how many people only become kind when they think you could change their lives. Marcus Whitmore whispered those words to himself while standing alone inside the underground parking garage of the Whitmore Grand Hotel at 1:12 in the morning as cold Chicago rain hammered the concrete ramps outside and the city lights reflected across the polished black surface of his Rolls-Royce Phantom. 3 days earlier, Marcus had discovered that one of his own senior executives had quietly stolen nearly $40 million from his company through fake maintenance contracts and hidden vendor payments. And somehow, the betrayal hurt more than the divorce that had destroyed his family 3 years before, because this time he had trusted the man completely. Marcus stared at the rows of luxury vehicles parked beneath the hotel and felt something inside him growing colder with every passing year. People smiled too quickly around billionaires. Employees agreed too easily. Executives laughed too loudly at unfunny jokes. Nobody seemed real anymore. That was why Marcus had started secretly visiting his own hotels without security teams or public announcements. He wanted to know who people really were when they thought nobody important was watching. Most nights the results disappointed him. Managers insulted workers the moment supervisors disappeared. Bartenders stole expensive liquor and replaced it with cheaper bottles. Engineers approved repairs they never completed. Everyone performed professionalism under bright lights, but honesty almost disappeared in the dark. Marcus adjusted the old baseball cap covering part of his face and reached for the Rolls-Royce door handle when the engine suddenly clicked once and died completely. His expression hardened instantly. He tried again. Nothing. The dashboard flickered strangely before the entire system shut down. Marcus slowly removed his hand from the ignition and leaned back against the leather seat while silence filled the garage. Then he noticed it. The smell. Somebody had tampered with the fuel system. His eyes narrowed immediately, less than 48 hours before a major merger. Announcement: his car mysteriously failed inside a secured underground garage. That was not bad luck. That was a message. Within minutes, 2 hotel engineers rushed downstairs while Marcus stood nearby, pretending to be another tired executive stranded late at night. Probably electrical, one man muttered while opening the hood carelessly. Could take all night. Marcus watched quietly without correcting him, because he already knew the problem was much simpler than they realized. Whoever sabotaged the car wanted delay, confusion, and expensive repairs. The first engineer tried forcing the ignition again. The engine groaned violently. Marcus almost stopped it before a soft female voice echoed across the garage. "If you keep doing that, you're going to flood the injectors." All 3 men turned at once. A young woman stood near a housekeeping cart beside one of the concrete pillars wearing a gray hotel uniform slightly too large for a small frame. Her blonde hair was tied back loosely, and faint grease stains marked the edges of her sleeves like she had touched engine parts recently. She looked exhausted, nervous, and completely out of place beside a $1 million luxury car. One engineer laughed immediately. And what exactly would a maid know about injectors? The woman lowered her eyes for half a second before quietly answering. "Enough to know that's not an electrical problem." Marcus said nothing, but for the first time that entire week, he felt genuinely curious. The older engineer rolled his eyes and slammed the hood halfway shut before looking directly at Emily, like she had interrupted something important. "Listen, sweetheart, this is a handcrafted V12 engine worth more than your yearly salary. Go push your cleaning cart somewhere else." Emily felt heat crawl into her cheeks immediately, but she stayed still beside the concrete pillar with both hands wrapped tightly around the handle of the housekeeping cart. She had heard comments like that her entire life. Men inside repair shops, assuming she was only there to bring coffee. Customers asking for a real mechanic after she diagnosed problems correctly in under 5 minutes. Even after years of learning from her father inside their tiny garage outside Milwaukee, people still looked at her blonde hair and housekeeping uniform before they listened to her voice. Marcus remained silent near the driver's side door, watching carefully beneath the shadow of his baseball cap. Emily should have walked away. She knew that. Her shift had technically ended 40 minutes earlier, and she still needed to catch the last bus across the city before 2 in the morning. But the sound of the damaged ignition kept bothering her because it was too precise to be random. Somebody had loosened the fuel pressure sensor manually. She could almost picture her father leaning against an old toolbox, saying the same thing he always said whenever customers ignored him. A machine only lies when a person touches it first. Emily took a slow breath. The sensor line near the rear assembly is disconnected, she said quietly. That is why the ignition is failing. The younger engineer laughed under his breath. Did TikTok teach you that? Marcus finally spoke for the first time since the breakdown. Check the sensor. The garage became completely silent. Both engineers looked surprised by the calm authority in his voice, even though neither recognized him yet. The older engineer sighed dramatically and reopened the hood. Fine. 5 seconds to prove this is nonsense. Emily watched him lean toward the engine while rainwater echoed through distant drainage pipes outside the garage entrance. Then suddenly the man stopped moving. His forehead tightened. He reached deeper beneath the assembly. What the? Marcus slowly folded his arms. Problem. The engineer swallowed awkwardly. The sensor line is loose. Emily lowered her eyes immediately before anyone could see the small flicker of satisfaction on her face. The younger engineer stepped closer in disbelief. That makes no sense. We checked electrical diagnostics already. Emily spoke softly again. Because the problem was never electrical. Marcus studied her carefully now, no longer pretending she was invisible. Can you fix it? Emily hesitated. Probably. The older engineer scoffed instantly. We are not letting a hotel maid touch her rolls. Royce. Marcus never looked away from Emily. I did not ask him. Something shifted in the atmosphere after that sentence. Emily could feel it immediately. For the first time in years, somebody important was not dismissing her before she even tried. Slowly, she stepped closer to the vehicle while the engineers exchanged uncomfortable looks nearby. She leaned beneath the hood carefully and located the damaged connection within seconds. Her fingers moved automatically from memory and instinct learned beside her father years earlier. The cut protective sleeve confirmed her suspicion immediately. Somebody had intentionally loosened the sensor with a thin blade. Emily frowned slightly while reconnecting the line. This was not random vandalism. Whoever touched this car knew exactly where to look. Marcus noticed the expression on her face. You see something? Emily glanced toward him nervously. This was done on purpose. The two engineers immediately stiffened. Marcus stayed completely calm. How can you tell? Emily carefully held up the sliced protective covering near the sensor line. That cut is too clean. For the first time that night, Marcus Whitmore looked genuinely interested. The younger engineer stepped backward and folded his arms tightly across his chest like he suddenly did not want to stand too close to the car anymore. Nobody gets access down here except staff, he muttered nervously. Emily carefully reconnected the loosened sensor line while trying not to think about what that actually meant. Somebody inside the hotel had touched this vehicle intentionally, and judging by the clean cut on the protective sleeve, it was not done by an amateur. Marcus stood motionless near the front bumper watching every detail with the same calm expression that made it impossible to tell what he was thinking. Emily tightened the final connection gently before lowering the hood halfway. Try now, she said quietly. The older engineer hesitated. His pride was clearly fighting with common sense. Finally, he climbed into the driver's seat and pressed the ignition again. For one long second, the garage stayed silent. Then the Rolls-Royce engine came roaring back to life so smoothly it almost sounded angry for being disturbed in the first place. The deep vibration echoed across the concrete walls while all three employees stared in disbelief. Emily instinctively stepped away from the car immediately, wiping grease from her fingers onto a cleaning rag tucked in her cart. There, she whispered softly. It should be fine now. Neither engineer spoke. Marcus slowly walked around the vehicle, once while listening to the engine carefully. Then he looked directly at Emily for several quiet seconds before asking a question nobody expected. Who taught you? Emily blinked in surprise. My father. Mechanic? She nodded once. He owned a small garage outside Milwaukee. Marcus glanced down at the grease stains on her sleeves again. And now you clean hotel rooms. Emily gave a small shrug like she had answered that question 100 times before. Bills do not really care what people are good at. Something in her voice made Marcus pause. It was not bitterness. That was what surprised him. Most people carried anger when life disappointed them. Emily sounded tired instead. Quietly tired. The older engineer finally cleared his throat awkwardly. Sir, should we still call a tow truck for diagnostics? Marcus never looked away from Emily. No, the engineer frowned slightly. But we should inspect the full system. Marcus answered calmly. The problem was already identified. Emily suddenly realized he still had not introduced himself, and something about his composure felt strangely familiar. Not employee familiar. Powerful familiar. Before she could think further, Marcus stepped closer and held out his hand toward her. Marcus! Emily froze the second she looked properly at his face beneath the garage lighting. The sharp jawline. The calm eyes. The voice she had heard in company welcome videos playing on break room televisions for nearly a year. Her stomach dropped instantly. You are Marcus Whitmore, she whispered before she could stop herself. One of the engineers almost choked beside the car. Marcus gave a faint nod. I am. Emily felt every ounce of color disappear from her face. Suddenly, the entire situation replayed inside her mind at once. She had corrected engineers in front of the billionaire owner of the hotel chain. She had touched his personal vehicle without permission. She had openly discussed sabotage inside his own property. I am so sorry, she said quickly while stepping backward. I should not have touched anything. I was only trying to help. Marcus watched her reaction carefully. Most people became fake the moment they learned who he was. Their posture changed. Their smiles changed. Their entire personality shifted into performance. But Emily only looked terrified of losing her job. You fixed my car, Marcus said calmly. That is usually the opposite of a problem. Emily lowered her eyes nervously. I still should not have. Emily. Her head lifted slightly in surprise because she had never told him her name. Marcus nodded toward the embroidered stitching on her housekeeping uniform. You noticed something trained engineers missed in under 30 seconds. His voice stayed calm and measured. That tells me more about this hotel than the repair itself. Emily did not know how to answer. Marcus glanced once more at the sliced protective sleeve in her hand before quietly adding, and tomorrow morning, I intend to find out exactly who touched that sensor line first. Emily barely remembered the walk back to the employee locker room after leaving the underground garage because her mind kept replaying the same impossible moment over and over again. Marcus Whitmore had stood 3 feet away from her listening carefully while she explained engine problems like she belonged there instead of pushing a housekeeping cart through hotel hallways at nearly 2 in the morning. By the time she changed out of her gray uniform and stepped outside into the cold Chicago rain, her hands were still trembling slightly. The city smelled like wet pavement and car exhaust while taxis rushed through glowing intersections downtown. Emily pulled her thin jacket tighter around herself and hurried toward the bus stop with exhaustion pressing against every part of her body. She still had another shift waiting for her in less than 7 hours. Across the city in a glass office overlooking Lake Michigan, Marcus Whitmore sat alone inside the executive security room of the Whitmore Grand Hotel, replaying underground garage footage for the 4th time that night. The screen showed Emily stepping quietly from behind the concrete pillar beside her housekeeping cart, while the engineers argued uselessly near the disabled Rolls-Royce. Marcus leaned back slowly in his chair while watching the footage again. She never tried to impress anyone. That was what kept bothering him. Most people jumped at opportunities to look intelligent in front of power. Emily had almost walked away instead. Marcus paused the video precisely when she noticed the sliced sensor covering beneath the hood. Sharp eyes, calm under pressure, no hesitation once she understood the problem. He had spent years building billion-dollar companies and interviewing elite executives from Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton, yet none of them had impressed him as quickly as a tired hotel maid standing in a rain-soaked parking garage at 1 in the morning. A quiet knock interrupted his thoughts. Head of hotel security Daniel Brooks entered carrying a tablet. You wanted staff records pulled? Marcus nodded, once without looking away from the paused footage. Emily Carter. Housekeeping. Daniel frowned slightly while reading from screen. 27 years old. Hired 11 months ago. No disciplinary history. Works overtime almost every week. Marcus stayed silent. Daniel continued scrolling. Mother undergoing cancer treatment at St. Mary Medical Center. Father deceased. Former owner of a small repair garage in Wisconsin. Marcus finally looked toward him. Education. Community college courses in mechanical systems. She dropped out after her father died. Something tightened inside Marcus at that answer because he recognized the pattern immediately. Talent interrupted by survival. He had seen it his entire life growing up in Detroit. Smart people forced into smaller lives because bills arrived faster than opportunities. Daniel looked back at the footage curiously. You think she is connected to the sabotage? Marcus shook his head slowly. No. His eyes returned to the frozen image of Emily holding the damaged sensor sleeve beneath the garage lights. I think she notices things other people ignore. Meanwhile, Emily finally reached her tiny apartment nearly 40 minutes west of downtown. The hallway lights flickered weakly as she unlocked the door quietly to avoid waking her mother asleep on the living room sofa beneath two blankets. Medical bills covered nearly every surface of the apartment alongside pill bottles, insurance forms, and unopened envelopes Emily was too afraid to read lately. She carefully removed her shoes and stepped toward the kitchen when her mother's sleepy voice stopped her. Long night. Emily forced a tired smile. Something like that. Her mother slowly sat upright. You look nervous. Emily hesitated for several seconds before finally whispering the words out loud for the first time. I met Marcus Whitmore tonight. Her mother blinked in confusion. The owner? Emily nodded once while setting down her bag. And I think I accidentally impressed him. Across the city, Marcus Whitmore replayed the garage footage one final time before quietly murmuring something he had not said about another person in years. Interesting. Emily woke up 3 hours later to the sound of her alarm vibrating across the nightstand beside unpaid medical bills and an empty coffee mug. Her body felt heavy from exhaustion, but she forced herself out of bed anyway because survival did not care how tired people felt. Pale morning sunlight pushed weakly through the apartment blinds while her mother slept quietly in the next room after another difficult chemotherapy session the day before. Emily moved carefully through the tiny kitchen, preparing instant coffee and toast before checking her phone for the time. 7:31. Another 12-hour shift waited downtown. As she tied her hair back in front of the cracked bathroom mirror, her mind drifted again toward the underground garage and the way Marcus Whitmore had looked at her after she identified the sabotage. Not impressed exactly. Focused, like he had spent years searching for something and unexpectedly found a clue hidden in plain sight. Emily shook the thought away quickly. Men like Marcus Whitmore lived in entirely different worlds from women like her. By 8:45, she stepped through the employee entrance of the Whitmore Grand Hotel, wearing her gray housekeeping uniform and carrying the same worn backpack she had used for nearly 4 years. The lobby already buzzed with wealthy guests dragging designer luggage across marble floors, while business executives rushed toward elevators, holding $1,000 phones against tailored suits. Emily blended into the background instantly, the same way housekeeping staff always did. Invisible, but necessary. She pushed her cleaning cart toward the service elevators when two front desk employees suddenly stopped talking the moment she passed. One of them glanced toward her nervously before whispering something under her breath. Emily frowned slightly, but kept walking. Something felt strange immediately. On the 12th floor, she began preparing executive suites for incoming guests while trying to ignore the unusual stares from other employees throughout the morning. Around 10:30, her supervisor, Karen Mills, entered Suite 1208 holding a clipboard against her chest. Karen was normally loud, impatient, and constantly complaining about staff shortages, but today she looked oddly cautious. Emily, she said carefully, operations management wants you downstairs at noon. Emily stopped making the bed instantly. Did they say why? Karen avoided eye contact. No, a familiar knot tightened in Emily's stomach immediately. Am I in trouble? Karen hesitated before answering quietly. Honestly, I have no idea. The next 90 minutes felt endless. Emily cleaned rooms mechanically while her imagination spiraled through worst-case scenarios. Maybe Marcus Whitmore regretted allowing her near the vehicle. Maybe the engineers blamed her for touching company property. Maybe security believed she was involved in the sabotage somehow. By the time noon arrived, her hands were shaking again. She stepped into the executive operations office on the third floor and froze immediately when she saw Marcus Whitmore standing beside the conference table, speaking with two senior managers. He looked completely different in daylight, wearing a tailored black suit instead of the baseball cap, an old coat from the night before. Powerful, controlled, the kind of man entire companies rearrange themselves around. One of the managers noticed Emily first. She is here. Marcus turned toward her calmly. Good. Emily stood awkwardly near the doorway while the two executives studied her with open confusion. Marcus closed a folder on the table before speaking. Miss Carter, I reviewed the garage footage this morning. Emily swallowed hard. Yes, sir. One executive crossed his arms skeptically. You identified the issue faster than our engineering team. Emily lowered her eyes immediately. I just recognized the sound. Marcus watched her carefully for another moment before asking the question nobody in the room expected. How would you feel about helping me identify other problems inside this hotel? Emily looked up in complete shock, while both executives turned toward Marcus like they had misheard him entirely. Emily honestly thought she had misunderstood the question at first, because people like Marcus Whitmore did not ask housekeeping staff for help identifying problems inside billion-dollar hotels. They asked executives, consultants, security firms, not women pushing cleaning carts through hallways at $10 an hour. The silence inside the conference room stretched long enough to become uncomfortable before Emily finally found her voice again. Sir, I clean rooms. One of the executives immediately nodded like he appreciated that answer. Marcus did not. And because you clean rooms, he replied calmly, you notice things other people ignore. Emily shifted nervously beneath the attention of everyone in the room. Marcus walked slowly toward the large glass windows overlooking downtown Chicago while speaking. Most executives only see reports. Employees on lower floors see reality. He turned back toward her. People talk differently around staff they think are invisible. The older executive cleared his throat carefully. Marcus, with respect, involving housekeeping personnel and internal investigations, could create unnecessary complications. Marcus looked at him without emotion. The unnecessary complication is that somebody sabotaged my vehicle inside a secured garage. The room immediately went quiet again. Emily could practically feel the tension between Marcus and the executives. One man looked irritated while the other seemed uncomfortable even hearing the sabotage mentioned aloud. Marcus returned his attention to Emily. I'm not asking you to spy on people. His tone softened slightly. I'm asking you to pay attention the same way you already do naturally. Emily hesitated. Part of her wanted to refuse immediately because this situation felt far beyond anything normal. But another part of her remembered the sliced sensor covering beneath the hood of the Rolls-Royce and the fear in the engineers' faces after she pointed it out. Something dangerous was happening inside the hotel. Marcus studied her expression carefully before adding, "You can say no." The sentence surprised her because powerful people rarely gave workers real choices. Emily glanced down at her housekeeping uniform and quietly asked the question weighing on her mind most. Why me? Marcus answered without hesitation. Because you fixed a problem without asking what was in it for you. For some reason, those words hit Emily harder than she expected. Most people in her life only noticed mistakes, unpaid bills, or things she lacked. Marcus Whitmore had noticed character instead. One of the executives finally stood up from the table, looking frustrated. We have trained security professionals already handling this situation. Marcus remained perfectly calm, and somehow a hotel maid still noticed the sabotage first. The man sat back down without another word. Emily almost felt guilty for embarrassing him, even though she had never intended to. Marcus picked up a small black business card from the table and handed it toward her. "If you notice anything unusual, contact me directly." Emily stared at the card in disbelief. It contained a private number beneath Marcus Whitmore's name. No assistant. No corporate office. Direct access. "Sir, I do not think I should, Emily." His voice stopped her gently. "Trust your instincts. That is all I am asking." Before she could respond, the conference room door suddenly opened and operations manager Vanessa Reed walked inside, carrying several folders against her chest. She stopped immediately after noticing Emily standing near the table with Marcus and the executives. A strange expression crossed her face instantly. Surprise first, then suspicion. Vanessa forced a polite smile toward Marcus. "I apologize. I did not realize you were in a meeting." Her eyes drifted toward Emily again. Marcus noticed it immediately. Miss Carter was just leaving. Emily nodded quickly and moved toward the door. But as she passed Vanessa, she caught the woman glancing down at the business card still clutched in her hand. It was only a second, but the look in Vanessa's eyes made Emily's stomach tighten. It was the same expression people gave whenever they thought someone undeserving had suddenly gained access to something valuable. Emily spent the rest of the afternoon trying to convince herself that nothing about her life had changed, but the private business card hidden inside her apron pocket felt heavier with every passing hour. She pushed her housekeeping cart through luxury suites overlooking Lake Michigan while wealthy guests complained about pillow softness, room temperatures, and delayed champagne deliveries. Yet her mind kept replaying the conversation inside the conference room. Marcus Whitmore had trusted her with direct access to him after knowing her for less than 24 hours. It made no sense. Around 4 in the afternoon, Emily entered Suite 1816 carrying fresh towels when she heard 2 men speaking sharply in the connected office area beyond the bedroom. "I do not care what Marcus suspects," one voice hissed quietly. "The merger moves forward Friday." Emily immediately froze beside the minibar cabinet. Employees were supposed to announce themselves loudly while cleaning occupied suites, but neither man seemed aware she had already entered through the service hallway. "If he starts digging through maintenance records, we have a problem," the second man replied nervously. Emily's heartbeat quickened instantly. Maintenance records. Her thoughts flashed back toward the sabotage Rolls-Royce. She slowly reached for the housekeeping card handle, preparing to leave quietly before being noticed, when one of the men suddenly stepped into the bedroom area, holding a phone against his ear. Emily lowered her eyes immediately. "Sorry, sir," she said softly. "I was just replacing towels." The man barely acknowledged her presence before walking toward the hallway again. Expensive watch, navy suit, silver cufflinks with the Whitmore corporate logo. Emily recognized him instantly from executive newsletters posted in employee break rooms. Richard Lawson, Senior Vice President of Operations. She kept her face calm while finishing the towels as quickly as possible. The second executive lowered his voice further once Richard returned to the office area. "You really think he knows?" Richard answered coldly. "Marcus always knows something. The question is how much." Emily pushed the housekeeping card out of the suite before either man noticed her listening, but her pulse refused to slow afterward. By the time her shift ended that evening, she had repeated the conversation inside her head at least 50 times. She sat alone in the employee locker room, staring at Marcus Whitmore's business card while fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Maybe the executives were discussing ordinary merger pressure. Maybe she was overthinking everything because of the sabotage. But deep down, her instinct said otherwise. Finally, she pulled out her phone and typed a message before she could lose courage. "I overheard something involving maintenance records and the merger. I think you should know." Emily stared at the screen for nearly 10 seconds before pressing send. The response arrived less than 1 minute later. "Where are you?" Her stomach tightened immediately. She replied quickly, "Employee locker room." Another message appeared almost instantly. "Stay there." 12 minutes later, Marcus Whitmore walked through the locker room doorway wearing the same black suit from earlier, except now his tie was loosened slightly like he had been in meetings for hours. Emily stood up so quickly she nearly dropped her phone. "I am sorry," she said immediately. "Maybe it was nothing." Marcus closed the door behind him calmly. "What exactly did you hear?" Emily repeated the conversation carefully, while Marcus listened without interrupting once. The moment she mentioned Richard Lawson's name, something dark shifted behind his eyes. "Are you sure it was him?" Emily nodded. 100%. Marcus remained silent for several seconds before quietly asking, "Why did you decide to tell me?" Emily looked confused by the question. "Because it sounded important." Marcus studied her face carefully again. No calculation. No attempt to gain favor. She genuinely believed helping was the obvious choice. Most people inside his company would have stayed silent to protect themselves. Emily had risked involving herself further simply because something felt wrong. Marcus exhaled slowly. "You may have just confirmed something I have suspected for weeks." Emily swallowed nervously. "Is Richard involved in the sabotage?" Marcus looked toward the locker room door thoughtfully before answering in a low voice. "I think somebody inside my executive team is trying to force this merger through before I uncover what they have been hiding." Then his eyes returned to Emily with surprising seriousness. "And whether they realize it or not, you just became a problem for them." Emily did not sleep much that night, because every time she closed her eyes, she heard Marcus Whitmore's final sentence repeating inside her head. "You just became a problem for them." The word stayed with her through the dark apartment hallway, through the sound of rain tapping against the windows, and through the early morning bus ride back toward downtown Chicago. By the time she arrived at the Whitmore Grand the next morning, anxiety sat heavily in her chest like a warning she could not explain. The hotel lobby looked normal on the surface with tourists checking out, businessmen dragging expensive luggage toward waiting black SUVs, and employees smiling politely behind marble counters. Yet Emily noticed something different almost immediately. Conversation stopped when she walked past. Front desk workers glanced toward her before lowering their voices. Two engineering staff members, standing near the elevators suddenly, turned away the moment they saw her approaching. It was subtle, but unmistakable. Somehow people already sensed she had become connected to Marcus Whitmore in ways they did not understand. Emily pushed her housekeeping cart toward the service corridor while trying to ignore the tension around her. Halfway down the hallway, operations manager Vanessa Reed stepped directly into her path, holding a tablet against her chest. "Emily." Her tone sounded pleasant, but her eyes did not. "Mr. Whitmore seems very interested in you lately." Emily gripped the cart handle tighter. "I'm just doing my job." Vanessa gave a small smile that never reached her eyes. "Funny. Most housekeepers do not get private meetings with the owner." Emily instantly realized somebody must have seen Marcus entering the locker room the night before. Rumors traveled fast inside luxury hotels because employees survived on gossip almost as much as paychecks. "He only asked me questions about the garage incident," Emily answered carefully. Vanessa stepped slightly closer. "Then I would be very careful about getting involved in executive business you do not understand." The warning underneath her words felt impossible to miss. Before Emily could respond, Vanessa's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen quickly, and her expression changed for just a second. Nervous. Then she forced another smile. "Enjoy your shift." Emily watched her walk away down the hallway in expensive heels clicking sharply against polished tile floors. Something about the interaction bothered her immediately. Vanessa looked less annoyed than afraid. 2 hours later, Emily entered Suite 2104 carrying fresh linens when she noticed the room safe sitting partially open beside the desk. That alone was unusual because guests almost always locked valuables securely before leaving. Emily approached carefully to close it and froze the second she saw stacks of corporate folders inside marked with Whitmore merger documents. She immediately stepped backward because employees could lose their jobs instantly for touching executive paperwork. But then she noticed one document lying half exposed near the edge of the safe with a familiar name printed. Across the top, Richard Lawson. Emily's stomach tightened. She should leave. Immediately. Yet something felt wrong again. Her instincts pushed against her chest the same way they had in the underground garage before she identified the sabotage. Slowly, she looked toward the empty hallway outside the suite before glancing back at the exposed paperwork. One line near the top caught her attention instantly. Emergency asset transfer approval. The numbers beneath it made her pulse quicken. Millions of dollars scheduled for movement before Friday's merger announcement. Emily heard footsteps suddenly approaching the suite and quickly stepped away from the desk just as Richard Lawson himself entered the room while speaking on his phone. He stopped cold when he saw her standing near the safe. For one long second, neither of them moved. Then Richard slowly lowered the phone from his ear. "What exactly are you doing in here?" His voice sounded calm, but his eyes did not. Emily's heart started pounding immediately. "I was replacing towels, sir." Richard glanced toward the partially open safe before looking back at her with a strange expression Emily could not fully read. Suspicion mixed with calculation. Then slowly he smiled. "Of course you were." Emily forced herself not to look back toward the open safe, even though her pulse was pounding hard enough to make her hands shake. Richard Lawson stepped fully into the suite and closed the door behind him with controlled calm, while slipping his phone into his jacket pocket. Everything about him suddenly felt different from the polished executive image shown in company newsletters. Colder, sharper, dangerous in a quiet corporate way that made Emily instantly understand how people like him survived inside billion-dollar companies for decades. "You know," Richard said casually while loosening his tie slightly, "most employees knock before entering occupied executive suites." Emily kept her voice steady the best she could. "Housekeeping schedules showed the room empty, sir." Richard studied her face for several uncomfortable seconds like he was measuring whether she believed her own explanation. Finally, he glanced toward the towels in her cart and gave a faint smile. "Right, towels." Emily nodded once. "I can come back later." She started moving toward the door immediately, but Richard stepped sideways just enough to block part of the exit without appearing obvious about it. "Marcus seems to trust you very quickly." Emily's stomach tightened. "So he knew, or at least suspected." "I only helped with his car," she answered carefully. Richard walked slowly toward the desk while speaking in the same calm tone. "People in this company spend years trying to earn Marcus Whitmore's attention." He looked back toward her. Then suddenly a housekeeper gets private meetings after midnight. Emily gripped the housekeeping card handle tighter. "I did not ask for any of that." Richard gave a small laugh without humor. "That is usually how influence starts." For the first time since entering the suite, Emily realized he was not trying to intimidate her emotionally. He was trying to figure out exactly how much she knew. Richard reached down calmly and closed the safe door before entering a security code. "You seem smart, Emily." Hearing her first name from his mouth made her uneasy immediately. "So let me give you some advice." He stepped closer with professional politeness still fixed across his face. Executives survive by understanding which conversations belong to them and which do not. Emily understood the warning perfectly. Before she could respond, her phone suddenly vibrated inside her apron pocket. Richard's eyes flicked downward instantly. Emily hesitated before pulling it out. One message. "Marcus Whitmore. Come to conference room. Be immediately." Richard noticed the sender name the second the screen lit up. Something dark flashed briefly across his expression before disappearing behind another controlled smile. "Well," he said quietly, "that answers my question." Emily slipped the phone back into her pocket without responding. Richard adjusted his cufflinks calmly. "You should go. Would not want to keep the boss waiting." This time he stepped away from the door completely. Emily pushed the housekeeping cart into the hallway as fast as possible without appearing panicked. The moment the suite door closed behind her, she exhaled shakily for the first time in nearly a minute. Every instinct inside her screamed the same thing now. Richard Lawson was involved in something far bigger than hotel politics. 10 minutes later, Emily entered conference room B on the executive floor and found Marcus standing alone beside a massive digital screen filled with financial reports and security footage timestamps. The second he saw her face, his expression hardened slightly. "What happened?" Emily quickly explained everything inside Suite 2104, including the open safe, the transfer documents, and Richard blocking the door while questioning her. Marcus listened without interrupting once.